Rosalina, morning, and thank you very much for coming. As part of the 40th anniversary commemorative event of the Gibraltar National Archives, I've invited you, if you are willing, to share a few thoughts on how you experienced the days of the frontier closure and the opening of the frontier, the full opening of the frontier in 1985.
I grew up in the village in Catalan Bay, very happy childhood. I thought I was very free because I didn't know there was a bigger world out there because it wasn't exposed to it. It was only till after a few years later that my parents managed to save, and we went on a road trip to Lisbon, crossing through via Tangier, that I realized there was a much bigger world out there, no? And everything was very striking for us, the size of things, the huge meadows, no? the countryside, that for us was very striking. But then we came back to Gib, to our safe zone, and it's not something that I attached much importance to.
I can remember before, during, and after. Let's put it that way. I must have been 10 years old when the frontier closed. When it closed, I don't think I noticed anything really, because at the same time, donde vivía yo en Sampits, éramos 4 hermanos, el patio de gente, y teníamos el escampado detrás, el monte, Sampits, el lío de Sampits, y ahí estábamos nosotros todos los días jugando así, con que no big change really, as far as I'm concerned. As I moved into being a teen, I think that's probably when we realized that there was something else that we could be doing. But luckily, my parents used to take us across on the ferry, con un coche, and ferry a Tanger, then cruzar Algeciras, and then we went on road trips and camping trips con la familia, as a family, no? We went as far as just above Lisbon, y también fuimos un año también a Benidorm y cosas así. So you could see that there was life outside our borders, no?
Yeah, Jerry, when the frontier closed, I was still young. I was about 5 or 6 years old. So I basically grew up in the atmosphere of a closed frontier. It was a tight-knit community. I used to do a lot of sports. There were a lot of people involved in sports. And eventually, through my teen years, the same. It was a question of going to the cinema, you could picnic at the beach, like you say, camping at the Eastern Beach, at the end of the Eastern Beach. And we used to have in groups, large groups of both boys and girls. And we used to meet out in different places. Go to, like I say, cinemas during the weekend. We used to go to the old casino. One of the favorite things with my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, was we used to go on Sundays to the casino, where they used to make a lovely tea with cakes and everything, and we used to go there a lot.
Gibraltar was a very safe place, and I'll give you a couple of anecdotes. We used to live in Barrowbeg, and there was never enough parking for the cars, so come home at night, leave the keys in the car. The neighbours would come, they'd move the car for you. No, they wouldn't knock on the door and say, "Oh, move the car." No, they'd move it for you.
Move the car.
They'd then put it back in a pocket. And that was like, Gibraltar is like safe. Nowhere in the world would you do that nowadays. Like everything in life, there's the upside, downside. No? For me, the downside was that I felt, like I think like a lot of my friends as well, that we were restricted. We were in a prison, like atmosphere. A very nice prison with all the family and the friends and being able to. And when the border opened, partially, in '82, another anecdote that I like to tell is that we went with the 1st 4th Scout Band. We played the Royal Tournaments in 1982, and we took 38 children with us. On the way from the airport to the camp where we were staying, we were just going across the motorway, and the kids were they'd lost it because they were all going, Tony, look, a real cow. And of course, they'd never seen one. The closed frontier, that encapsulates to me what the closed frontier did to Gibraltar and Gibraltarians.
I was 9 years old when the frontier closed in '69, and obviously I was aware, but it was more like a blur. But there's, like everything, there's certain things that stick in your mind. And the main aspect was the worry. I used to hear conversations between my grandparents and my mother and my father about the worry that the frontier was closing, how we were going to progress without any food or amenities and all that. We were going to be hemmed in whether we were going to survive or not. But progressively, as years went on, I realized, even at the age of 11, 12, 13, there was a steel determination amongst the people that this is not going to bring us down. And people became very inventive, clubs starting to spring up, football, there was a lot of sports, cinema, everything, and the people of Gibraltar got together, so to speak, and we did prevail at the end of the day. One anecdote which I remember, and I'll never forget, is during the day that frontier closed, or possibly after, I can't remember exactly now, I was at the balcony with my grandmother at Blackwatch House in Laguna, and the block faced the Winston Churchill Avenue, and the streets were deserted at that time. This was early morning, about 8 o'clock. And down Winston Churchill Avenue came a 4-ton Bedford, a military Bedford.
A Fortana, no?
A Fortana.
Fortana.
And it was coming down, and I was at the balcony with my grandmother, as I said, and I realized that at the back of the Fortana, there were men dressed as cooks with their hats and all that. So it caught my attention. And then all of a sudden it slowed down. It slowed down completely. And they looked up and they started waving at us. And that's peculiar. And then I realized there were servicemen who were going to the bakery at the industrial area.
Right.
Because the military took over the baking of bread until other arrangements were made. And the funny thing was as it slowed down, they all looked up and they started waving back, and one of the guys got up from the, don't worry, you'll be all right, we'll all be all right, and thumbs up, and they drove off. And that is so impressive. It's still in my mind.
We all went to the frontier. I was covering for GBC at the time. I just started, very young reporter. And it was pretty dramatic as well, because everybody sort of went there with flags and the British we are, British we stay, and the referendum result and all that. And as the frontier guard in Spain came across and actually physically locked the door on the side, because the gates were closed, although ours are always open, don't forget. And then there was this side door where a lot of people walked in, the cars went the other way. And as they locked it, everybody started singing God Save the Queen. It really was tremendous. That moment was very emotional, and there we were, everybody there singing.
It's very interesting.
It brings shivers, goose pimples.
But it's very interesting that you've actually mentioned that about the gate and how our side was never actually shut. And when I actually conducted a little bit of data gathering in the preparation for the exhibition, we actually traveled to the archives in La Línea, which I was extremely well welcomed by the archivist there, José Telles, and he actually mentioned that fact.
And which, when the opening came about in '82, the pedestrian opening, caused a problem because they couldn't get the key working, and there was a heck of a delay there with everybody apprehensive and television cameras all over the place. But from then on, once it closed, then here we were, enclosed in little Gibraltar. It was a different atmosphere then, of course. We had to fend for ourselves. The most important thing, or among the most important thing, was the Women's Association, which was called the Housewives Association, an old-fashioned word we wouldn't use now. But they got together, a lot of women who weren't working in those days, and decided to support the economy by working. So they went into shops, they went to drive lorries if necessary, vans, delivery, whatever was needed to make up for the loss of labor, which later, of course, was reinforced by the MOD bringing out the Moroccan labour force. But the atmosphere there in Gib was pretty positive. We stuck together. We knew we had to stick together.
I was born the year the frontier closed, so I didn't really know any different when the frontier was closed. To me, it was the norm. Traveling away from Gibraltar was a very big deal. We had family in Spain. My grandmother came from Grazalema, and it was a massive thing going to visit. We did, and we also went to Portugal when the frontier was closed, but it was a big deal. It wasn't that easy. So I was a young teenager when the frontier opened fully. As a 15-year-old, my priorities were fashion, pop music, boys, friendship, so I wasn't really that impressed that the frontier was opening. But I have my diary from 1985, and I did have a look at what I wrote. And it says, one of the most important days in Gibraltar's history, the frontier opened fully for cars at midnight. Many people were complaining, others were happy, but to tell you the truth, I couldn't be bothered. That was me as a 15-year-old. I'm not even going to watch the programs that are discussing this. I thought if it opens, good, and if it doesn't, also good. What has to happen will happen, whatever the situation. But it did have a big impact, really, especially on our school holidays, bank holidays. When I read through my diary, we did used to do things in Spain.
I was 13 when it closed, so I've got memories of when it was open before the frontier was closed. And I spent it a lot with my family, going to picnics in the Almoraima. I used to go to La Linea on my own with my friends. We used to walk across, used to maybe go to the movies there. Yeah, it was good recollections. The closing of the frontier, I can't, because I didn't have that much freedom to move around. My family were quite conservative. And so living in Gib, going to school here, you just get into a routine. So I can't really say that I missed it. I think maybe because the teenage years are so different from the previous ones. And then when it was opened in '82, partially, I was 26. So that was a totally different ballgame. We used to meet up with friends, go to La Linea, because we could only walk through. And we go for our tapa runs and enjoy the La Linea area, because that was the nearest we could go. And well, when '85 came, that was another ball game.
Albert, thank you for coming. What we would like to ask you is what impact did the full opening of the frontier in 1985 have upon your life? And if there are any anecdotes, anything you would like to share with us?
First of all, I'd like to state that with the full opening of the frontier marked or symbolized the failure of the policy by Franco to coerce us and to restrict us, and obviously he wanted to get on our knees and make us suffer, which he did for a while, but we were resilient and did so. 1985, it marked the full opening of the frontier, and obviously meant that we could expand, travel into Spain, get the car and see places that we had seen before the frontier closed. Anecdotes? 1982, when it was pedestrianised, maybe, I was dying to get a car and drive. I had just passed my license, and we got together, my wife and I, my little daughter and a couple of friends, and we drove all the way to Malaga. And we had heard that El Corte Inglés had a very cheap, eat as much as you want for a few pounds, buffet type thing. And I remember we saw this huge platter of langostinos, and we ate them all. And the people there, called our attention. Anyway, that was the first experience I had of traveling in Spain after I'd passed my license. I was recently married, and the world was our oyster. We travelled. I'm glad that the frontier had opened after so many years. But mind you, I didn't suffer a closure because I was young. I was 50 when it closed. I was doing my GCSEs, O level at the time, and preparing for A level to go to university, and was dying to leave Gibraltar. It meant getting a scholarship and going. And I did 5 years away. So of the 16 years that the frontier was closed, I spent 5 away, so it was 11. And of those 11, I'm recently married, bringing up a family. But yes, exciting times at the time, but I was busy to be too involved in being an ostrich and putting my head in the ground. Yeah, excellent days.
Well, my earliest memories are of Gibraltar. I never ever went to Spain until the frontier opened. My parents were making do with what they had, and I never left Gibraltar until I was 12 when I went on a school trip to London. Other than that, I knew Spain through my telescope at home. I lived up at the Calpe, and I was able to see the Spanish hinterland, the Campo de Gibraltar, with my telescope, and enjoyed viewing and being really happy to see a train coming from Algeciras to La Estación in the old days. But Gibraltar, I grew up here, and I would miss it a great deal if I didn't live here, because I've grown up in a closed society, shall we say. But my memories are of being out there in the sea, fishing with my dad and my mum on the boat, and up the rock during winter when the weather wasn't that good, and exploring and going up, getting up to no good, mainly with my sister and I, just shifting around because we lived up at Calpe. It was my backyard.
I was about 22 when 1985 when the border was opened. To be honest with you, I had started work in Galliano's Bank at the time. I was there at the beginning. I also remember that it's rather than go towards the frontier when it opened, I was at home with a few friends. We watched it live on TV. It was quite an experience. It was quite beautiful to see the people who were there wandering up and down the full frontier, the whole Haribo. It was a real party that we had. But going forward, to be honest, I think that it was a very incredible period for Gib. The border was opened, we needed the freedom, we needed to get out. And that was one of the problems here that we had. Gibraltar at that time was totally bankrupt. There was nothing, we were struggling, the people, a lot of changes were happening around us. But those were good times. I mean, Gibraltar developed. The important thing was for Gib at that time was the development. A lot of money started pouring in, the finance center started to take off. And Gibraltar really, at the end of the day, started to strive. If the border had not shut, then it would have been a different Gibraltar in 1969. And that was what created what Gibraltar is today.
My mother was Spanish, so half of my family lived in Spain. We used to go and see my granny during school holidays and so on. It closed, I was 8 years old when the frontier closed, and it reopened, I was 24. So it wasn't a wild, la frontera abierta, it's open, let's go there. I think that we got used to staying at home, and it was very gradual. It was fun because obviously I drove and we had a bit more freedom. But I don't remember that the opening of the frontier had such a big impact on me, other than being able to see my family more regularly. I remember my young cousins going over with them once the frontier opened, and they were like crazy looking at cows and horses, and as if they'd never seen one before in their lives. So that was funny.
When it partially opened, I remember seeing it on television I was still young. My parents, I was still school age, so they wouldn't let me go. But when it fully opened, I was down there behind the big Union Jack with my friends, and being amazed at seeing the gates open, and how strange it looked to me. And my friends, and we were getting together, and it'll never be the same. And so it hasn't. Gibraltar's changed radically over the last 20, 30 years.
When the frontier opened,
was there a heightened in security?
I don't think at the time I perceived it as a heightened security risk, or whether it went up or not. But I remember being on duty the first day when it opened. I think I was on late, which was a 2 to 10 shift. I was like a complete culture shock. You know, people coming in and out. Obviously, we had to check passports, Spanish passports, stamp the passports. And at the beginning, you know, it was completely new to us. One of the things I remember, which I mentioned to you before, is I remember this old man at the time. For me, he looked old. I was in my early 20s, and he looked in his 80s. I remember this old man walking into Gibraltar, kneeling down and kissing the floor. You know, anecdotes like that. And it was really, like I said, something completely different to us. What happened in 85, when the frontier fully opened, that we had cars, different nationalities coming in, it was, the way I perceived it was more work for us. Because not only were we dealing with Spanish passports, which we knew at the time, which were green, but now we were having passports from other nationalities.
Totally new, no?
Totally new. I mean, the Norwegian passports were a bright red color.
Right.
The German and Irish were both green, different tones of green, and things like that.
There was huge excitement. By then I was working. There was huge excitement about the opening. I also remember the other side. Many people worried about what's going to happen. We're going to be invaded. There's going to be loads of thefts. So there was this general worry of the unknown, no? But then excitement kept on building and building and building. And I remember that night, I remember watching it on TV. And then I think it was the following day or the day later that we actually crossed. It was open for pedestrians at the time, if I remember correctly. And it was so strange to be here and then be able to cross and go into another country. Was so strange, no? And then look back and say the rock is there, but I'm over here. So it's very difficult to explain if you haven't lived it.
Una cosa que vividly se me queda a mí en la mente es yendo a Jiménez del Ibá. Entonces, Jiménez del Ibá, you used to drive up, pasando Gaucín, and then you drove down towards Jiménez del Ibá, from above it. Y al tú llegas para abajo, tú ves la estación de Jiménez del Ibá, the train station there. Y la primera vez que lo vi, digo yo, ¡uf! Esto se parece a los modelos de los trenes, porque entonces tenía los train models in, and it was, in fact, was the other way around, ¿vale? The train models accurately represented lo que era una estación de tren, pero para mí era al revés. Para mí era, mira, se parecen los modelos, and it was the real thing, no? Yeah. So that was really a striking vision for me. They said, oof, look, this is now new. This is what I want to do.
Personally, when the border opened partially, for me that was part of my experience. I was one of the many Gibraltarians who took the car across to Tangiers and then Algeciras, and I used to have the car garaged in La Linea. Right. And then at the weekends, we used to go across, go to Spain for the weekend, come back on a Sunday night, ready for work on Monday, no? And it was that, I think, excitement of, in 85, especially when the border opened, A, being able to bring my car back into Gib and have it normally, and B, it was the excitement of being, right, you know, we're now part of the rest of the world, where we can now travel with restrictions, obviously, that we all know at the border, but we could actually get out there, no? As a young man, in 85, we would have been 28, so it was like, let's get out there. Let's experience the world, no? Rather than Gibraltar's tight-knit community. It was that sense of freedom all of a sudden that we'd got. You know, finally we've broken the last of the sieges, and finally we can get out there.
How did you enjoy the Spanish pop culture that was being introduced, the 40 Principales and all this?
Yeah, I used to love watching those programs, Toccata, Disco Visto, listening to the radio. And actually in March 1985, Ole Ole came to play in Gibraltar in the cave, St. Michael's Cave. I am assuming that it was made easier for them because the frontier was open fully, and that was incredible. And then China Crisis played, I'm not sure if it was 1985 or 1986, but somebody who was very much into pop culture, that for me was like, so we did have a big impact in that way. We also would, get in our cars, go to Benavis, the river, spend the day there, having a barbecue, going along the river, looking for turtles, for, frogs, things like that. My grandmother, as I said, came from Grazalema, so we were able to just, get in the car, stay overnight in Ronda, visit them, and then come back ready for school the next day. So it did open up a lot of doors. And actually, I also have a diary entry that says that we went to the market in Algeciras, and I bought some lovely diamante earrings, which were all the rage in the 80s. So it did sort of, but at the time, I didn't think it was, I think it's because you're so close to it that you don't really see the bigger picture.
I remember buying a mobile, because we didn't have mobiles in Gibraltar, but they had them in Spain, and I bought myself a mobile with for safety.
Safety reasons.
In the car.
Have it there in case you need to make contact back home. Let everybody know that you're okay.
Yeah. And I just loved driving in Spain and
because obviously
discovering.
Parents would have been very worried. All of these youth, Gibraltarian youth, venturing out into the unknown every weekend, La Costa, Marbella, Estepona, totally new places, no?
And I've got to admit that we always used to go in a group initially. But once I got the confidence of being able to drive on my own in my little Starlet, I drove more and I travelled more in that little 1.3 litre car than I have done in later years. Maybe it's also the age time, the 30s. I was in my 30s and I used to think, I said, I could drive from here to China.
If need
and
be.
That for me was an amazing thought.
And an amazing sense of freedom.
Yeah,
totally.
So the world opens up to you and it's an amazing feeling. My friends had left when the border closed. They were already in their 20s, they got jobs outside. And then they all returned when the border opened, a few years once the border had opened. But I was the one out of a group of 4, who were the nearest and dearest, who stayed. So I had lived through the whole experience of the border closing and all the things we went through in our, the politicking of how Spain was treating us. But when they came back, I don't think they ever really knew what it felt like. They could hear things from their families when we spoke, but it's only the people who lived in Gib during the time that the border was closed that really knew what it was like to be under threat and isolated.